Pando. I'm a lecturer in Institute of Technology here. I teach computer security.
Okay, nice to meet you.
I got two questions for you. One is, we talk about responsible AI. I understand responsible innovation, but the question is, responsible AI or efficient AI, which one takes precedence? And is there a middle line or an intersection between the two? That's number one. Number two is, in the sovereignty of nations, we've seen sovereignty of nations defining concepts and values. Yesterday I was discussing with some people who were saying, oh, Germany has resorted back to coal to power their industry because Russia has cut gas supply and they have to continue production. And so I was, oh, what about climate change? Has it not changed? So companies, sovereignty of nations help them to define values and concepts. So it means for them, climate change should take back seats, power industry should take front seats. So coal has come in to power the industry. Now, because we were talking about the issue of having a kind of a global kind of agreement or responsible AI. And I said, how does this fit into having global compliance of responsible AI? Because nations define what works for them, and nobody can take it away from them. Thank you.
Yep. So I think I couldn't hear you clearly, but the two questions you're asking, one is, where do you draw a line between efficient AI and responsible AI? And then the second one was, is there a requirement for global compliance for artificial intelligence? Did I capture the two questions right?
Yes, because the nations have the sovereignty of nations help them to define what works for them. So how do you think it's possible to have a global compliance of what the responsible AI should mean, since they have some level of sovereignty to define what works for them and what does not work?
So I think to answer your first question, and sorry, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback, but if Cyril, you can also type in the questions, that would help. So to answer your first question, I think it really depends upon the enterprise priority. And everyone is, by the way, defining efficient versus responsible AI differently. So I think the key question is, what do you define efficient AI as? And then where is the intersection point with responsible AI? And where does that lie in terms of your enterprise priorities? So I don't think there is one size that fits all for the question that you're asking. It's a great question, but I think it really goes back to, how is an enterprise defining what that efficiency is? And is that efficiency accruing to the values that that enterprise has set for itself? And then is it aligning with, if they do have responsible AI guidelines, does it align with that? So I think it's just summarize, there's a lot of terms that we've seen emerge in this ecosystem, everything from responsible, efficient AI, trustworthy AI, ethical AI. What really is required is an enterprise stepping back and defining it for themselves, because there is a lack of common definition across the globe. This feeds into the second question, if I heard that correctly. I think there is, what we are finding is harmonization of standards to really create global compliance requirements for artificial intelligence is going to take a long time. And the reason for that is that every country that at least we are working with or in discussions with have their own set of, again, how they've defined responsible, trustworthy, ethical AI, how they are measuring it, and how they're going to keep accountable the enterprises that operate within that jurisdiction. So I think coming up with global compliance standards for artificial intelligence is going to be very tough in the near term. However, sector by sector and use case by use case, we will see more action happening. So as an example, for credit underwriting, there's already an emerging movement globally to define what does the global compliance look like for credit underwriting across different financial sectors in Singapore, United States, Europe, but also different policymakers. So are we going to see global compliance standards? I think it's going to be a while, but are we going to see sector specific, use case specific, global compliance standards emerge? Absolutely. I think that is something that we're going to start seeing in the near term.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Ali, you want to? Yeah, please.
Hi, it's Ali. I'm a technical accounts manager from industry. I don't know a great deal about AI, but I wondered if you could perhaps shed some light onto the adaptability and integration and practical usage of current AI technologies within our lives, and whether do you think that in the next decade or two, it is possible that it could perhaps adversely impact a number of jobs within various sectors? And if that sort of thing were to happen or be realized, do you think there will be a possibility that perhaps we would need to come across concepts of universal credits or some sort of a payment establishments for humans who are completely out of job, just to be able to avoid any uprising or social discontent? If you could shed some light onto that matter, well, these matters, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Great question, and I think a one that needs a lot of thought and insight. Having said that, I am a techno-optimist, someone who really believes in technology, not only to serve us, but also it helps create new categories of jobs. So just to give you a couple of examples, I don't think artificial intelligence is going to be a displacement of humans. It's going to be a complete augmentation. And in some places where it does result in, eliminating certain very, specific jobs, what we are going to see is creation of brand new categories of job where human oversight, human creativity is absolutely going to be needed. So one of the things that we are seeing in the industry is this whole notion of persona metamorphosis. And what that means is if artificial intelligence is being used to optimize for a particular job, for example, in robotics process automations, it is actually ending up creating a new job profile for humans where high level of creativity and reasoning is needed. So I am a big believer that AI actually is going to enable us to actually work in spaces which does need those unique human skills, which really certainly can't be replaced by artificial intelligence. So do I believe in a world where we are completely all out of jobs? I don't think so. I think we are super creative and we're going to end up creating these plethora of new job profiles that we see emerge. Just to give you an example in responsible AI space, we've started to see in the past 2 years creation of responsible AI, head of responsible AI, chief ethical humane officer persona has emerged. And primarily this is an individual who is coming from philosophy, psychology, as well as technical background, and now trying to understand the audit function and compliance functions. So I think similar to such a persona, we are going to see emergence of other personas in other industries. So again, as I mentioned, the question you're asking for a tech optimist is, I believe that, it's a human augmentation opportunity where we are going to continue doing more creative jobs. So I can't answer the question of the universal basic income and some of the other bigger themes, just because I believe that artificial intelligence is just here to work in partnership with humans, and then creation of new jobs is literally on the horizon. It's already happening.
Thanks for that. I also wanted to chime in on that before I take all the questions. That's exactly what we're seeing in other industries today, is that augmentation, a new definition of personas, where certain tasks can be automated. So it goes back to what you mentioned, RPA, robotic process automation, but the supervision and oversight that's done by human. So human has been elevated rather than displaced to a new functionality and role we play, where you then become the assistant and supervisors to these particular robots that do those functions, and you oversight them by looking through what they've done, because they provide the pace and speed and accuracy. You do oversight, but it's creating a new wave of new jobs and new rules, and those rules haven't been defined. And they will continue to be defined as we go ahead, because there's so much we're learning and uncovering as we go ahead. Because the next question will be, these are ML based. What about deep learning based, reinforcement learning based, human cognition based? And as you evolve into those new spheres of new personas, of clever personas, you also elevate new job roles for humans. We've got a couple of other questions, if you may. Yeah. So Ethan, take the stage and ask his question. And then you can.
Hi there. So first of all, thank you for your talk. It was very, very interesting. I've actually had to bring my laptop up because I needed to actually articulate this in some way. First of all, my name is Ethan Bain. I'm from Aberdeen University. So when it comes to developing responsible AI and monitoring for bias in developed systems, what challenges are presented when developing evolutionary AI systems which are capable of self-learning after initial training? I mean, to put it into context, in cybersecurity and developing protective systems, is it impossible not to have a bias to protect against unknown and zero-day attacks? I mean, how can these models be developed effectively in a responsible and managed way without impacting innovation and that sense of automated protections against the unknown?
So I think you're bringing up a great question. There is still like you'll hear everyone in the industry talk about the problem of unknown unknowns, but let's make it a little bit more concrete. We are seeing, and we actually partner a lot with production monitoring systems. So again, you can't solve for everything, but the question that we should be asking is, at the time of designing the system, what are the things that you need to know, that you need to pay attention to, and then in production, be able to continuously monitor it. Now, beyond that, especially in self-learning systems or reinforcement systems, if there are new risks that emerge, yes, absolutely, you might not have expected them, and testing and monitoring for them is super complicated. But I think there is a mechanism by which I'll give you an example. So one of our customers is, building risk scoring models, and these risk scoring models are used in financial services. They take in credit card transaction data, and based on that credit card transaction data, they output a risk score to basically say, like, should you be getting certain marketing products that you should be marketed to you? Should you be getting certain amount of loan, etc.? Now, as you can imagine, a lot of these risk scoring algorithms, they're not getting any PII information. They've been stripped of the name. They're not getting any information around the age, gender of this individual. But there's a second and third degree proxies that could potentially field into this risk scoring algorithm, and you can make a determination based on where that person is transacting all the time, what they're buying, and then can get an understanding of, potentially this is a brown female who is, has kids because she's buying a lot of diapers online, etc. So there is, through this second and third degree proxies, you could potentially make a determination. Now, what ends up happening in production environment is you want to be careful about monitoring for some of those protected attributes around gender and around age in this example. So then the question then begs is, based on what you've designed and based on what potentially could be the unintended consequences, that bias could emerge and show up because of this second and third degree, protected attributes. Those are the things that you're monitoring for in production environment. But does that cover all the risk that might show up in a production system that you've not anticipated? I think that's really tough. But the key, I think, idea behind responsible AI is to be very intentional about understanding those risks upfront and then monitoring for those risks continuously. However, also being open to new risks that might emerge and then quickly adjusting the system in a way that you could now go back and sort of revisit the way you had built those systems and incorporate these new characteristics. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the idea is, one of the things, unlike previous software practices, once you've deployed the system, you've tested it, it's out in the market, you don't have to pay attention. That actually changes drastically in machine learning, because you do need to do continuous monitoring. You do need to do continuous auditing against the initially identified risks. And I think that is what makes this responsible AI space even more critical and more challenging.
You had a question. Thank you for that. We have another question and another question.
And Cyril, I'm just so sorry. I do have a hard stop in 5 minutes.
Okay.
But I am happy to, if you can share my email address with the audience, I'm happy to respond to questions that I might not be able to get to in the next 1 minute.
Thanks for your time. So we'll make it the last question.
Right. So I'll try to keep my question. I'm Hamid Yusuf. I'm an AT and also PhD student at Cardiff. So my question is regarding the implementation of the regulation standardization of AI regarding window time. So if a government wants to release a specific standardization, it could take a lot of time, like 2 years, to release the standard. So by the time that those standards are out, they could be out of date, and they would need to create a new standard, which take another 2 years. So related to time, how can we find a solution for this problem, or like approach it in a way that we can always have an updated standardization for the current AI? Thank you.
Yeah, so the problem you're outlining is not, again, new to artificial intelligence. We've seen this across all the other areas as well. Specifically for machine learning, what we are finding right now is, in the absence of core standards and regulation, a lot of the AI first companies are self-auditing, they're self-regulating. And what that means is they've come up with their enterprise policies and define what good looks like for them. And based on those enterprise policies, they are now publishing governance standards and mechanisms for their customers to indicate, hey, for this particular application, fairness was critical for us. This is how we have sourced the data. This is how we've tested the data. This is what the metrics that we are measuring against. And then this is how we are performing on those metrics. But as you can imagine, in the absence of standards, the companies are quickly making sure that these enterprise policies keep getting up to date based on the feedback that they're getting from customers, as well as the feedback that they're getting from peers. So to address your question, I think, again, hard regulation, hard law takes time. But in the absence, we are seeing best practices being adopted as norms, and companies self-auditing against those and continuously updating those. Will that trend continue? I absolutely think it will. And we have seen in history that the soft law or soft regulation or best practices actually causes better outcomes and much more robust standards to emerge. And we're going to see the same in artificial intelligence as well.
Thank you very much, Navrina. With that, we'll give her a round of applause, please.